We want to once again remind everyone to thank our sponsors as they were able to make this conference free for all of us. It has resulted in, last I heard, 440 people, which is a conference record, which is awesome. So thanks to them for providing funds to make it free for everyone. And am I missing anything, Jeremy? Anything else that you'd like me to share?
No, I think you're all set. Thanks,
Cool.
Daniel.
I'll let you take it from here.
All right, I'll take it away. Like Daniel said, my name is Jeremy Chance. I'm the Senior Coordinator of Operations with the University of Kansas. I use pronouns he, him, his. Like Daniel said, as a part of the Communications Committee, this was just an idea that we had to, we assessed the need across the region and an opportunity to use some of the platforms that we have. So that kind of turned into this COVID conversation series. So I'm in the dreaded 9 a.m. slot, but I appreciate y'all for being here with me this morning. And I know I'm going up against a pretty heavy hitter in another great presentation. So I thank you this morning for tuning in for this conversation. So just kind of a brief overview of this session this morning. We'll talk about why we're here. So more specifically, our learning outcomes, the purpose of this presentation. Just a little quick information about me to provide the context for who I am and how we got to this presentation or this conversation series. I'll dive into specifically some of what the COVID conversation series was, how it came about, some of our considerations for that. Touch a little bit on the COVID specific findings. I know I'm sure many of us are living these changes day to day right now, but just kind of recapping some of those things. And then we'll touch base on what the COVID conversation series led to, some of the other opportunities that have presented themselves because of that. And then I'll open it up for any questions or feedback. So with that, just going to talk a little about why I'm here and the purpose of this presentation. So first and foremost is really just to share the findings from the COVID conversation series poster presentation style. I never did a master's thesis or anything. I never did one of those poster presentations at the conference, but this PowerPoint presentation is kind of my version of that. So just going to kind of present, again, the process and what we learned from that series. Also spotlighting experience that isn't explicitly campus recreation. We all know the importance of communication as a transferable skill, but I have a little bit of a unique background that I was able to utilize some of those skills in this conversation series. And then finally, just really emphasize the work of the Region 4 Communications Committee. Daniel's our chair, Belinda's our vice chair, and a lot of really great work aside from the COVID conversation series. So with that, I do want to kind of throw out a little disclaimer. There may be some takeaways. I hope you walk away with some great information, but really the main purpose behind this is just to share some of the information that I found throughout the process. Matt came to me and suggested that I propose or present on this topic. So again, this is kind of more of just a information setting session specifically. Why you're here, again, we got to get those learning outcomes in. So hopefully after today, you'll walk away with understanding the general findings from the COVID conversation series. You'll learn a little bit about the creative process, from start to finish, how that process set up the framework to continue the conversation series, and then how it may be able to apply to other projects. And then lastly, just learn one application of a transferable skill set. And that's just how I applied my background to this project. So with that, I do think that it helps to provide some context to talk a little bit about myself and my background. So like I mentioned, I'm the Senior Coordinator of Operations with KU Recreation Services. I've been in this role for a little over 2 years. But with that, during that time is when the committee work teams and volunteer groups really kicked in. So like I mentioned, the Communications Committee, and then working with Daniel on the state level for a committee. But prior to that, prior to a brief stint in Region 6, I did my master's at the University of Houston, where I earned my master's in Sport and Fitness Administration. But I was also the fitness graduate assistant there for 2 years. And I could probably do a whole nother presentation just on my experience at the University of Houston with that incredible staff and the team that I had there. But yeah, 2 years down in Houston, go Cougs. And then prior to that, I was at Purdue University, This picture here is after I earned my Bachelor's of Science in Kinesiology, and this is after year number 9. I have a relatively unique story from an undergrad perspective. So this is after year 9. I worked with Purdue Rec Sports, now Purdue Rec Well, as a personal trainer and a fitness floor monitor. Interned a little bit there as well, but 3 years with Rec Well. And the next picture, this next person here is really the reason why we're here. We're here today because of this guy. Yes, that is me. Like I mentioned, I spent 9 years at Purdue. The first 5 were earning an undergraduate degree in mass communication. So I thought I wanted to go into sports journalism and to be a writer. That mass communication experience really is kind of what led me to apply some of these skills with the COVID conversations. And you can also see that person is a little heftier than the second picture there. So through that experience, I lost a lot of weight and wanted to help people do the same thing. And that's what led me to the fitness career, which has ultimately led me here. But we're here today. I'm here today because of that first guy there. One other thing about me is that I can be relatively predictable. And with the COVID conversation series, I didn't script any of the beginnings, but as I was going back and watching through the videos, they all tended to start the same way. So I hope this plays correctly. What's up, Region 4? My name is Jeremy Chance. I'm here with Region 4 Communications Committee. That didn't work as well as I wanted to, but again, I started it with the same hand clap, the same phrase, and then kind of shifting back and forth. But anyways, we'll talk a little bit into the background of the COVID conversation series. Before doing that, I do think it's important to acknowledge and honor and pay respect to the over 225,000 people that have died due to COVID, and send condolences to the families. The conversation series certainly wasn't to make light of that. There's a lot of bad going on with the COVID-19, but we wanted to use our platform and our resources to connect to our membership and hopefully to be a source of a resource. And again, I hope our Region 4 membership hasn't been impacted, and hope everybody's staying healthy, safe, and well. So diving into, again, the specifics of our COVID conversation series, just kind of talking about how it really got started. Thinking back to March when things really started to shut down, NIRSA actually responded relatively quickly, very quickly, and started throwing together these different roundtables and virtual sessions at that association level, which then turned into the Ideas in Motion series. And I look back at my calendar, March 27th is when the first facilities virtual roundtable was. And I'm sure we've all attended, a variety of roundtables and connection points at this point. I've attended the facilities, the operations, the member services, a variety of program areas, COVID-specific sessions, and in a variety of platforms as well. So NIRSA and the Campus Rec magazine and Athletic Business, we've all sat through a variety of these roundtables and virtual sessions. My participation, my volunteer work is also what kind of got this conversation going. So as I mentioned, in May, working with Daniel as our state leader of Kansas, kind of wanted to really solidify our state level communication. So again, amidst the COVID pandemic starting, really wanted to create these program area specific work groups. So, volunteered to serve as a co-chair of our facility operations work team for the state of Kansas, and was meeting, throughout the summer, pretty much bi-weekly with our colleagues across the state to learn about what schools were doing, what schools were planning to do. So we're having that conversation at the state level. And then in June, when Matt talked about the new committees and the communications committee being one of those, I was invited to serve on that newly formed communications committee. So kind of taking those two things together. And then the opportunity to regionalize. We knew the conversation was happening across the nation and kind of at that association level. Daniel and I could speak to, we know the conversation was happening at the state level, and we view there as an opportunity to serve our Region 4, and kind of regionalize the conversation and provide those resources and bring that conversation specifically to our region. It was a timely topic with a conducive timeline. So we know, COVID is still dominating the conversation, but specifically at that time when it was happening, we knew it was such a timely topic, and our membership was wanting the resources, wanting to connect. So it was an opportunity to create that platform and in conducive timeline. So throughout the summer, a number of schools were still kind of going through that planning phase. And as we progress through the PowerPoint and we talk about when some of the schools reopen, you'll kind of see those varying the varying timelines, and some never even closed. I know Tarleton State, I think, didn't go through a traditional shutdown like many of us did. So there's such a variety in how schools approached it or had to. But the timeline to be able to put these conversations together in preparation for the fall, the start of the fall semester, which is when it seemed most schools were planning to reopen. And it provided an opportunity to take the experience from our early reopeners and apply some of those best practices. And I think that's a staple of our industry as a whole. It's not an overly competitive industry, and we're able to, again, apply those best practices and take those resources. And then finally, we had the creative license from our regional leadership. Like I said, Matt put together our communications committee, and we didn't really have any real expectations other than manage our social media accounts, connect with our membership. But other than that, we essentially had that creative license to do whatever, to suggest, to try some new things. And ultimately, the goal of that committee was to highlight the good work and the good people of Region 4. And we wanted to extend that, or we wanted to apply that to this COVID resource sharing. So essentially, we got the green light to try out some new ideas in the COVID conversation series, which started as the reopening conversation. It really blossomed from there. Just some things that needed to be taken into consideration. The first is just the representation across Region 4, and that played itself out in a variety of different ways. Again, I'll always give kudos to Matt for expanding state representation across the committees. I spent 2 years in Texas. I've spent 4 years in this region, and I know Texas tends to dominate or play a large role in our region, and it was nice to be currently in a state that isn't Texas, to have had the opportunity to be a part of the committee. And I think the way Matt assembled a lot of these committees, you see that representation across our region. So we also wanted the conversations to incorporate as many of those states across the region as possible. So we kind of gather that information a couple different ways. So we use communication and other committee membership to identify some schools. So A&M and Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, we had membership on our committee. And then Wichita State, the Kansas experience. But then we also reached out to state leaders from the other states to see who would be good sources or good resources for the conversation. And we have 6 of the 7 states. We certainly missed a school from New Mexico. So if anybody's on the call from New Mexico, like Matt said yesterday, we'd love to have you connect you into the region in our communications and highlight the good work we know it's being done out there. We also wanted to take into consideration, both sides of the house, right? I think the COVID changes, I think we typically think of what are we physically doing to change our building? And we saw that a lot throughout the conversations. But there's also the programming side of the house. And we wanted to, make sure we're including both sides of that in our conversations. So while the initial conversations may have focused specifically on the facility side, and all of the conversations had touched on those physical changes that were made, we wanted to be sure to acknowledge that our programmers, and specifically our competitive sports folks, were going to need some additional guidance or resources or connections across the region. And then some of our later episodes incorporated professionals from both sides of the house. And then, we wrapped up with a couple executive directors who were able to grab everything. We were able to hit, a variety of levels across the org chart. So we had some grad assistants all the way up to that executive director level. So it's really great to see the variety of representation in that regard. And then lastly, just the participants were in a various phases of their reopen process. So of the 6 conversations we had in 7 schools involved, I think only one wasn't open yet at the time when we had the conversation, but some had been open for 1 month or 2 months. So we wanted to kind of have a variety of levels of at that reopen perspective. Some things we also needed to take into consideration was just the length of the conversation, understanding the attention span, other priorities. We wanted to make sure that the videos were short enough to be that short and digestible, easy to view kind of snapshot of what's going on, but long enough to still have some substance to it and really get a lot of great meat to the conversation. So our initial goal was 10 to 12 minutes in those conversations. And then I say intention versus reality. Our first conversation with the gents at Texas A&M was just over 12 minutes. I'm like, okay, so maybe it won't work. So the reality of it was 0 out of the 6 conversations ended up being under 12 minutes. But then we kind of shifted to maybe more of a realistic timeline of 12 to 15 minutes. 4 out of the 6 conversations hit that range. So we wanted to kind of be conscious of attention to the time spans and attention to detail. And then lastly, just some of the contents within the conversation. So I wanted to make sure that the conversations or these interviews felt conversational. We didn't necessarily want our participants to have to list off every bullet item of all of the changes that were being made. And so wanted to kind of tailor the questions in such a way that they were going to be able to highlight maybe some of the unique changes, maybe some of the more specific changes to their facility, and then being able to list those specific bullet point changes, provide reopening documents, all that stuff could then be shared on the web page. So we're able to really use kind of a multimedia approach to use the Zoom recordings of the conversations, but then after taking that recording, would upload it to our web page and kind of provide, kind of listing out some of those things, attaching some of the other resources. So the videos themselves could feel conversational, but the rest of the resources would also then be available. And then as the series went on, started to get a little more creative or fancy with some of those web posts, including some of the social media videos that schools were sharing for their reopening, and we're able to kind of expand some of the information that we were using, posting on the webpage. The conversation series wouldn't be possible without those who participated in the conversation. So I do want to take this time to thank the 7 schools that we had participate in the conversation, and just kind of go episode by episode just to talk a little bit about it. So our first conversation was with our colleagues at Texas A&M College Station. We had OC, Zach, and Steven. So again, kind of a mix of that facility side, but also the programming side a little bit with Zach and Steven. We released that episode in the middle of the summer. Like you said, I can see there, July 17th, and Texas A&M had already been open for about a month or so. So we felt that was a really good way to start the conversation series. And like I said, you can see there, the conversation, that first one was 12 minutes. So thinking we're right on track. Our second episode, we highlighted Wichita State. So going back to my role at the state level and being a part of that facilities work team, had already been having these conversations with Carolina and Luke, and they had kind of gone through some pretty unique challenges or some, they had one of the first schools that we were aware of that had a exposure incident, and it needed to kind of adjust staff on the fly. So kind of through that experience from the Kansas State level, we knew they would be a good representation for our conversation to represent Kansas. So again, still looking at July, in the middle of July for that episode to be released. Their conversation kind of leaked into closer to 15 minutes. So again, episode 2, expanding what the reality of that length of those conversations were going to be. And they reopened on June 1st. So again, one of the first schools, if not, I think the first school in the state of Kansas to reopen. Our third conversation was with our colleagues from Missouri, and after recording the episode that ended up being at 28 minutes, we had to dub this one the extended cut. And it was a really great conversation, I think, with our colleagues from SEMO and Missouri State. kind of wanting to blend those two conversations. But as I was kind of going back and watching as the conversation was happening, I didn't necessarily have a timer in front of me, but I could definitely feel that I'm like, I think it's been a little bit longer than 15 minutes. And then we wrapped up that conversation. It was right at about 30 minutes. So we'll say 15 minutes per school. But again, with Red and Hannah, Ashley and Lauren, really great conversation that blended, again, both the facility side and a little bit of the program specific stuff from our colleagues in Missouri. Our fourth episode was with Oklahoma State. Brittany brought that operations experience, and then Clee and Britton really hit it from that intramural, that competitive sports side. This was the conversation we were really excited about because they weren't open yet. So this is one kind of that planning phase. We released the episode before they had reopened, but they were doing some unique things as far as their programming went. So we wanted to make sure. Brittany spoke up about the operation side, the physical changes, but I think this episode was able to focus a little bit more on the programming, the competitive sports changes that they were preparing to make. And then again, just the kind of having not been open yet, it was a very unique perspective or take on the series so far. Our last two episodes were focused on or held with our executive director level. So it was really great to talk with Jeremy from the University of Arkansas. Was able to kind of provide that perspective across the entire department from that 300,000 feet level, however you want to say it, and provide that insight for that conversation. Again, at this point, you'd see they had been open for about a month or so, and we're in the phase one. And we're getting ready to transition into that next phase. So that was also a really great conversation to have as they're getting ready to transition through to the next phase. And then episode 6 was with LSU, and was able to chat with Lori Braden. And this was a conversation I was really excited to have, in addition just to the standing LSU has in our region and in the nation, in our association. Lori was also part of the NIRSA level reopening framework foundations work team. So it was really great to talk with her a little bit about what LSU specifically was doing, but then it also we were able to talk a little bit about, okay, what's going on across the nation, provide that kind of background at that NIRSA association level, which is why that conversation ended up being a little closer to 20 minutes. It's really great to kind of get that insight from Lori from that work team. Okay, we'll dive into a little bit of the specific findings of kind of the meat, the tangible things that came from our conversation series. There were a number of common challenges or things that were really persistent throughout all of the 6 conversations. And I think these are all challenges that for all of us that are on the call today experience in one way or another at our own universities and our own departments. And first and foremost is just the fact that it's an unprecedented environment. I don't think this is anything like our industry or the world has seen. So I think being able to essentially shut down or adapt on the fly and without really knowing what's ahead of us, I think was certainly a challenge, but we were all adapting to in an unprecedented environment. Another key challenge seemed to be that everybody is subject to various layers of jurisdiction or oversight. So the mask policy, I think, is a really good example of this. So, there's kind of oftentimes conflicting policies on is a mask required or not at your university level, at the city or county level, and then at the state. I'm thinking back to my conversation with Lori. Again, she just talked a little bit about how there's competing or conflicting rulings and what's the best for the LSU community. So that was just something that I think all conversation participants had mentioned at some point, just how having to manage and deal with an ever-changing multiple layers of oversight. There was also just concern with some staffing challenges, both at the professional level and the student level. Talking with Lauren and Ashley at Missouri State, some of their staff had to be furloughed. And I know we had colleagues here in the state of Kansas who were also furloughed. So I think that was a challenge, again, across the region. Some were facing professional staff furloughs. the challenges of working in a new environment, working from home, work life, family life, trying to that barrier being gone for a lot of us. So that created some challenges. And then student staff challenges. I think for some who may not necessarily, whose universities may be in your traditional college towns, and students may not either stick around or be around, having enough staff to keep buildings open and functioning appropriately was certainly a concern and a challenge that teams needed to work through. And then not that professional staff is immune to COVID, but it seemed like our students were seemingly more susceptible to either coming in contact with somebody who had the virus or contracting it themselves. So just the staffing challenges of keeping students safe and healthy, again, to keep our buildings up and running. Another common challenge was just the ability to try and being asked to forecast, usage and needs with so much unknown and changing. I know I can speak for us at the University of Kansas. We had to staff our building to what we thought usage might look like, and then now we're living the reality that, hey, our usage is probably a lot less than what we thought. But schools are being asked to try and forecast what things are going to look like with there being still so much unknown and the situation continuing to evolve and change. And then obviously programming with various restrictions. A lot of us are reducing our checkout equipment that we have available, or towel service. So a lot of those services that we typically offer, just based on either state, regional, university guidelines, not being able to offer some of those things. I know we had a conversation yesterday about locker rooms. Some schools have them open, some don't. So obviously our services potentially are limited with those various restrictions, but I think our programmers have taken, the significant hit of trying to offer these engagement opportunities for our students while managing the various restrictions that we're having to deal with. And then finally, the unknown budget impacts, whether it's student hourly or, supply budgets, not knowing what the fiscal year is going to look like or what next year is going to look like. I think there seemed to be the challenge of, okay, how do we offer these services and programs, but needing to do it in an unknown fiscal environment. And lastly, I think the most common theme that came from a lot of these participants was that rec services or campus recreation or whatever the department is called, oftentimes serve as the guinea pigs for the university. I'll use, again, Wichita State as the example. When they reopened June 1st, I think it was relatively shortly after that, they had, 5 students who were out at a party in a potential exposure incident. And Carolina and their team, went to the university's COVID response team and said, okay, what do we do? And they didn't necessarily know. They didn't necessarily have that plan. So I think the common theme was that these departments, our facilities, our departments were asked to be some of the first ones to reopen before university COVID work teams really had developed much of a plan. So I think that it was a challenge. Some certainly view it as an opportunity too, to kind of be that campus leader. But I think a lot of times the sentiment was that, our departments were really the guinea pigs for how to respond and handle these certain situations. Won't spend too much time here on the physical changes. I think a lot of, again, we see these things every day now that many of us have reopened. A lot of this stuff is going to be the same across all of our rec centers, but certainly, and most obviously, is our increase. We saw increased safety measures, so increased cleaning protocol, frequency, duration, hitting those common touch points. Our PPE and our masks, right? We're certainly seeing those all over the place now, and then just the various plexiglass barriers, the physical distancing, but also increased training with our students, kind of reviewing this protocol, how to reopen. And then increased staffing. I know a number of the conversation participants talk about needing to add additional staff, whether it's to manage reservation check-ins, whether it's to monitor new space or other spaces that have been repurposed. We just need to increase staffing across some of the participants. And then we all have seen, spaces being repurposed, reconfigured, reimagined. you know, basketball courts converted to fitness spaces, closets being reused, reconfigured. I know there's a number of schools, I think Texas A&M and Arkansas, needed to kind of reconfigure their entry and exits. You know, just needing to kind of adapt kind of those egress perspectives. So again, a common theme that we're seeing, those spaces repurposed and reconfigured to be able to space out our equipment. So physically distanced capital, right? So, you know, creating that physical, at least 6 feet of distance. I know some schools have gone up even to 10 to 12 feet per, you know, piece of equipment, strength and cardio. So we're moving those spaces, spreading that equipment out so our members can exercise safely, but also our human capital. So our student staff are being asked to, you know, physically distance themselves and take those appropriate precautions to make sure they're staying physically far enough away from our members and from each other. Just a variety of modifications to our day-to-day operations. I think many of the folks we talked to on these conversations, and then even throughout the state and region, have adjusted, you know, facility hours in one way or another. Definitely over the summer, you know, fall hours potentially a little bit, and as we move into the unknown of our Thanksgiving long semester break, you know, updated hours there. You know, modifications to our services, and then to the technology that we use. You know, schools were talking about utilizing, you know, IM leagues, traditionally an intramural application, but, you know, to manage reservations, or, you know, Fusion Go, the app kind of being used more effectively. So kind of modifying how we're using the technology, modifying our services. And then modifications to programming. Again, I think for the programmers that are on the call, you know, knowing you have to change, limit your programming, modify how a sport is offered, or just completely not offer at all. I think we're certainly seeing, you know, sport clubs, I think is the one that's kind of most obviously and clearly hit with, you know, travel restrictions across the nation and our region, obviously. But again, having to modify those programs, whether it's limiting them, modifying them, or not offering them at all. And then lastly, you know, blending work, working from the home office and from the office. You know, I think again in March, many of us shifted to work from home, but some are kind of in that still blended format of working, some from the office, some from home. But again, that's just kind of a physical change that needed to be made. So those, as I was kind of going through those things, those were what I kept thinking of, like hard skills versus soft skills, right? The tangible versus intangible things. So all of those physical changes are the hard changes. And as I was going through these soft changes, or more kind of the intangible things, I thought it'd probably be better for our participants to hear from them directly. So again, I hope this audio works correctly.
Hey, definitely be adaptable and be patient. Like we said, we went through a lot of trial and error, and we still don't have it quite 100% right, but it works for our facility. So don't get so stuck on one way that you're not listening to either the students, the patrons, your other colleagues, or anybody else in the region as to something they've tried at their facility and they've had success with.
Sure. Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize for everyone that's listening to this. It's not like I'm going to give away something that people don't already know. But the big thing for me was just communication with our student staff. You know, I know OC's area, I know ourselves in strength and conditioning. Like, we were weekly, if not more frequently, communicating with our student staff. But also, when we reopened stuff that we talked about that intellectually worked out, did not actually work out. Right. So, you know, OC and Steven and I were going back and forth a lot about how we were going to manage the check-in process, where staging was going to be. So communication with your colleagues is really important, because, you know, what works for Texas A&M may not work for everyone. Everyone's got a different facility, different choke points, different realities. So we were very fortunate that our staff were more than willing to come back in large numbers right away. That may not be true for some people, sure, but, you know.
Well, Ashley kind of hit on what I was going to say is reach out because everything is so different. Like we have our folks at SEMO who I feel a lot of people could learn from and use. I mean, although Cape Girardeau is not St. Louis, it's still a rec center that is open at a university. And so those are good examples to use that, they're campus recreation professionals. And I know that just last week, Hannah reached out to me and was like, hey, we have a mask policy, help. And so we talked about it in our state meeting, and I'm sure you watched it, and I'm sure it wasn't helpful because that's how the people at S&T felt of like, why have a mask policy? And so I know a lot of us are in the same boat, and I know that we're all on different boats, but boats are boats in the end. And so I know that it's difficult from time to time to have your own policy, but reach out to others and at least try not to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. And so that was my tidbit of expertise of so far is help, ask for help.
Be flexible and be ready to change. When we first started down this road, I told our staff to come with a plan A, B, C, and a D, because while we look at A, we may figure out it doesn't work. So what else have we prepared so that we can keep moving? Because this changes so fast, we have to have options ready. And that has really helped us in terms of we had an A, and that was our priority. We had B and C in case we had to make changes. And those have been really helpful to ensure that we can continue to pivot with purpose, answer the university's call. We were a guinea pig really for our campus. We're the first one to really open. I think housing has like a dozen, maybe people total living on campus. But it's gone very well. Over prepare so that you can dial things back as needed along the way.
Awesome. All right, last one here.
I think the biggest thing, Jeremy, that I would share with everybody is it's all going to be different.
Yeah.
And there's no one right answer for everyone. I think as student affairs professionals, the important thing for us to remember, and I think a hard thing for all of us at different times, is that things are going to change so rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And that working in a time of ambiguity and uncertainty is really hard. I don't care if you're a Gen Z or you're a baby boomer.
Right.
It is tough. And so meeting each other with grace and patience and vulnerability to even say, hey, I'm sorry, or I was wrong, or I feel really strongly because of this, because of another reason kind of beyond the work thing. Can we talk through this? And, some of those things, we can't do that per se about public health mandates that we don't control. But as we interact with each other and as we work to serve students and making sure they have a quality experience and that, they have a sense of mattering and belonging and that everyone feels included in the work that we do, what I would share with our Region 4 colleagues is that what you do at your institution is right for you. And what someone else does at an institution is right for them and for their community.
I thought it would be just, again, a fun way to share, to kind of tie the conversations in and let our participants speak for themselves. Couldn't have everybody participate, or didn't want to put clips, from everybody. So I apologize. Hannah's on the call, didn't include your tip of the roller coaster. But again, you can check out all those tips and conversations on our website. But I think COVID, some of the changes, or COVID highlighted that our industry, and we all know this, but soft skills are required. And I think a couple key things that, my colleagues obviously just shared through those clips is, some things that are required is creative thinking, specifically for our programming side of things, not being able to offer your traditional flag football or pick up or basketball 5-on-5. I can speak for John Randall. We're doing 3-point contests and pop-a-shot contests. So being creative in the programming, virtual group fitness classes, like that's so incredibly creative, and still being able to create those touch points and those engagement opportunities for our members, but require that creative thinking. It also required critical thinking and problem solving, from the facility side, thinking, okay, what equipment is most ideal? What do we need? How do we solve this problem? Where can we place it? How do we rearrange this or that? I think this situation really highlighted, that we needed to think critically and what's most mission essential, and how do we solve those problems to really still to open and function a building, but in a safe way, in the safest way possible for our students, for our members, for our campus communities. Flexibility and adaptability. I know a couple participants mentioned, plan A and B and C, and a part of this plan kind of coming back. We've all experienced this. We need to be flexible and adaptable. I think back even to back in March when this all started, we were on our spring break, and that turned into what we thought was going to be an extended spring break. So our team at KU, put hours and hours of meetings together to try to create a reopen plan. And then the university shut down because of the county order. But we need to be flexible and adaptable. And again, all of our participants here emphasize that in one way or another. And that idea of empathy. I don't know that it was explicitly stated throughout the conversations, but this is a super stressful time for everyone. We know COVID is impacting our Black and Brown colleagues more than our white folks. We know that lower income are being impacted differently. Our students are being impacted differently. Life at home, maybe working from home, maybe just a little more stressful than typical working in the office. So I think we were required, but to have that empathy for each other in the situations and take into consideration each other's mental health and what can we do to survive and get through to reopening in the fall semester and still living this COVID pandemic. And then lastly, our traditional other duties as assigned. I know, thinking back to the conversation with our Missouri folks, talk about kind of jumping in other program areas to do this or that. I think this situation, again, identified that, we are all recreation professionals who maybe have our focus area, but ultimately the goal of our department is to provide those programs and services for our communities, and we'll do what we need to do to chip in and help. So I think, again, this highlighted that other duties as assigned. Last few slides, just wanted to highlight, what the COVID conversation series itself started and kind of led to. Hopefully you've seen, what it did was it was able to establish the conversation series as a thing, as an entity. So after that kind of wrapped up at the middle of August, working with our committee, it's like, okay, what's next? Once we've had this thing, how do we apply it to another topic or conversation, or what do we do with it? And Belinda, our co-chair of our committee, really suggested, hey, Hispanic Heritage Month is from September 15th to October 15th. Maybe we incorporate that, or we highlight that. So we took it, we ran with it. We had a series of 5 conversations, starting with the graduate assistant level with Serena and Chris, up to, our essentially our final event, which was our roundtable, Facebook Live, kind of tying all of our social media into one, but establishing that identity-based conversation series. And again, we're looking ahead, there are some other identity-based conversation series that we would like to plan. You're looking to Black History Month, Pride Month, all those other things. I think we can have those conversations for a variety of identity groups, but also, having program area specific conversations and utilizing, highlighting various intramural sports competitions or sport club events, are highlighting our group fitness instructors who are doing remote virtual teaching. I think this conversation series, recording an interview, having a conversation with somebody to highlight the good work that they're doing, I think has application outside of the COVID conversation. Providing a platform to share the good work across our region. Ultimately, that's the goal of our communications committee, is to highlight the good work that our region, are doing. I put the face and the questions to it, and letting our team kind of highlight themselves. And then finally, creating an opportunity to connect with colleagues otherwise would not have. Again, our region can be very Texas centric, and I think it was a great opportunity to expand. I mean, I don't know that I've spoken prior to this, had a conversation with somebody from an Arkansas school, for example. So I think it broadened my personal experience and connection and my network. But I think it also hopefully opened those who tuned in for the series, to learn, okay, what's going on in Arkansas, what's going on up in Oklahoma, just kind of expanding those networks to those you might not otherwise have. And then lastly, that last bullet point was talking, or that last learning outcome was applying a skill set. And this one is, again, just kind of for me personally, I was able to take the transferable skill that I had of communication. I'm a good verbal communicator, I'm a good written communicator. It's experience that I have from my life prior to recreation, as I guess a former journalist kind of, but taking that experience I had as a mass communication and public relations student and applying it to our campus recreation setting. It's not your traditional hard skill of my day-to-day role. Yes, obvious communication is, but interviewing and writing, those aren't necessarily critical to my role as an operations professional, but this was an opportunity where I could apply those previous experiences to then serve our region. So really applying a skill set, I wrote down, identify a strength and then share that strength with others. So for me, it was identifying my personal strength of communication and then sharing that strength with our members through this COVID conversation series. So with that, that's kind of it. Again, more of a information sharing setting than I hope you all will walk away from that with something, but certainly wanted to provide this opportunity for any questions that may have popped up about the series, any feedback. Obviously our committee is new, suggestions, just kind of wanted to open the floor more or less. Daniel, I don't know if anything came through in the chat at all.
Nothing did come through on the chat, but I think now would be a good time for anyone to post anything on the chat. That might be the best way to ask it, or go ahead and raise your hand. I have the video pulled up. I also did post the feedback link. If anyone has any issues, please let me know on that. But obviously, myself as a presenter, I always appreciate the feedback. But not to talk about that, let's any questions that Jeremy, since he was kind of the main communicator on this entire series. Does anyone have any questions, anything along those lines?
And if not, that's okay. My email address is there, just jmchance@ku.edu. And then obviously you can connect with us at a variety of our social media platforms. Certainly give us a follow. One of the things we did with this conversation series was we posted it on our website, and then we shared across our platforms. And our committee is trying to best utilize and share that original content that Region 4 is creating across those platforms. So again, emails if you have feedback directly from me. Otherwise, you can certainly feel free to reach out at any of these platforms to connect with us. If there's no questions, I don't want to keep anybody any longer. So unless Daniel has anything to wrap up, I want to thank y'all for tuning in this morning. I want to thank you for consuming the series over the course of the summer. It was, again, selfishly and vain, but it was nice to kind of take an idea, see it run with it, and then just kind of see it come to fruition. So I'm very appreciative to our region for consuming the content. I hope y'all found it valuable.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to email Jeremy if you do have any further questions. Jeremy, I think maybe do you want to share your email in the chat? That way anyone that may need it. I know it's probably on the slide. I apologize. I should have had that prepared.
Good. I gotta find the chat. There it is. Yeah, I'll type it in here.
And then also thank you to everyone, because I know Matt said this multiple times. Our region and campus rec professionals have worked together more in the past 6 months than we possibly ever have. And I think it's sharing info like this. So thank you for attending, participating, contributing. It's all been very beneficial for at least all of us. So Thank you, Jeremy, as well, and enjoy the rest of your conference, everyone.